I think where people go wrong is when they think that things can remain timeless and that time doesn't take its toll. We couldn't have been here without Peter, and we couldn't be here today with Ace and Peter.
When news of Ace Frehley's death broke, the rock world fell silent, but one voice mattered most. Yes, Ace passed just last week. For days, Paul Stanley said nothing. No statement, no tribute, not even a whisper. Then, without warning, he finally spoke. What he revealed wasn't just about loss, it was about decades of pain, pride, and brotherhood buried beneath layers of makeup and music. And what Paul confessed left even lifelong Kiss fans stunned. Body. Paul to his late brother. When the news of Ace Frehley's death broke, the rock world fell silent. Across generations, fans flooded social media with disbelief and heartbreak. Guitarists around the world played Shock Me and Rocket Ride in tribute, their strings echoing the sound of a man who made the electric guitar sound like lightning. But amid the outpouring of grief, one question rose above the noise. Where was Paul Stanley? For decades, Paul had been Ace's closest counterpart in Kiss, not just musically, but symbolically. The Star Child and the Spaceman, two sides of the same myth. Yet, as tributes poured in, Paul said nothing. Not a tweet, not a statement, not even a quiet nod. His silence stretched on for days, then a week, until fans began to wonder whether this was more than mourning. Was he still holding on to old wounds? Or was he grieving in his own private way? After a little while, he spoke, this time with one of their mates. It was the words of his former KISS bandmates that cut deepest. In a rare joint statement, Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons released a message that was both emotional and raw. Ace was an essential and irreplaceable rock soldier during some of the most formative and foundational chapters of K1SS. His style, his sound, and his spirit helped shape everything we became. He was our brother, our bandmate, and our friend. Today, we remember the laughter, the music, and the fire that only he could bring. Peter Criss, the original drummer who had shared the stage with both Paul and Ace since the very beginning, added his own words. Ace influenced and touched the hearts of millions of people. His guitar sang like no one else's. He was one of a kind. For fans who had followed their decades-long saga, the breakups, the reunions, the reconciliations, these tributes felt like the final chord in a song that had lasted 50 years. Remember when Paul and Ace had little collisions? Paul and Ace shared one of the most complex relationships in rock history, a mix of admiration, tension, and unspoken brotherhood. They were never true enemies, but they were rarely on the same page. From the earliest days of Kiss, their personalities clashed in ways that were both creative and combustible. Paul was the perfectionist, always chasing precision, professionalism, and control. He believed in rehearsing until every note hit exactly where it should. Ace, on the other hand, was pure instinct, spontaneous, raw, and unpredictable. He thrived in chaos, hated authority, and preferred to play by feel rather than plan. That contrast fueled Kiss's early magic, but it also planted the seeds of conflict. As the band became a global phenomenon in the late 70s, Paul and Gene Simmons began to dominate the group's direction, handling production, songwriting, and business strategy. Ace, meanwhile, felt boxed in. He wanted to keep Kiss hard, heavy, and unfiltered, but the band was leaning toward spectacle and commercial polish. He later admitted that he started to feel like a guest in his own band, watching decisions being made around him. What made it worse was that his creative input, though brilliant, was often ignored. Paul once confessed that Ace was incredibly talented but unreliable, while Ace countered that the others were control freaks who suffocated his ideas. By the late 70s, Ace's struggles with alcohol and substances only deepened the divide. His erratic behavior made touring and recording difficult. Paul, who prided himself on discipline, grew increasingly frustrated as Ace missed rehearsals or arrived late to sessions. In one interview, Paul reflected, Ace was a genius on stage and a ghost everywhere else. For Ace, the pressure and tension pushed him further into isolation. He later said he turned to substances to numb the feeling of being misunderstood. Their friendship quietly withered, replaced by professionalism held together by the music itself. When Ace finally left Kiss in 1982, the split was less explosive than inevitable. The band continued, but the chemistry was never quite the same. In the years that followed, both men occasionally threw barbs through interviews, Paul criticizing Ace's inconsistent work ethic, and Ace accusing Paul and Gene of being obsessed with control. Even during the 1996 reunion tour, which reunited the original lineup, tension simmered behind the smiles. The old wounds never fully healed. After decades of tension, Paul's message felt like closure. For all their differences, they had always been bound by the same thing, the music that made them brothers, long after the noise faded away. In memory of Ace Frehley, we look back on his final days and how, after a sudden fall in his home studio, his health rapidly declined, ultimately leading to his passing. The final fall, Ace Frehley's last days. By the fall of 2025, Ace Frehley was, by all appearances, in a good place. After years of touring, recovery, and reflection, the once turbulent guitarist had entered a quieter chapter of life. He still performed, recorded, and met fans, always with that sly grin, that effortless spark that never seemed to fade. But behind the scenes, Ace's health had begun to show signs of wear. Decades of physical strain, late nights, and the toll of old habits had left their marks. Still, no one could have imagined how quickly everything would change. On September 25, 2025, Ace was working in his home studio in upstate New York when tragedy struck. According to reports, he suffered a severe fall, an accident that, at first, didn't seem catastrophic. Friends and colleagues said he was in good spirits earlier that day, talking about new projects, even tossing around ideas for a final solo tour. But within hours, he was rushed to the hospital after complaining of dizziness and losing consciousness. Initial assessments revealed something far more serious than anyone expected: a traumatic brain injury, the result of the fall. Doctors placed him under close observation, and soon he was transferred to Morristown Medical Center in New Jersey for intensive care. Fans learned of the accident days later when his management announced the cancellation of his upcoming tour dates, citing unexpected medical issues. At first, many hoped it was temporary, a setback from which Ace would recover, just as he had bounced back from so many other crises in his life. But as the days passed, updates grew scarce. On October 16, 2025, the media broke the news that sent shockwaves through the music world. Ace Frehley had been placed on life support, with a ventilator assisting his breathing. He was suffering from severe brain bleeding, complications from the fall that his body could no longer fight. Doctors reportedly told his family that his chances of recovery were slim. The man who had once electrified arenas with his lightning-shaped guitar was now in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines and quiet prayers. Sources close to the family said they struggled deeply with the decision that followed. For over 2 weeks, they waited, hoping for signs of improvement, any flicker of consciousness. But the damage was irreversible. That morning, Ace's family gathered one last time in his hospital room. His daughter, Monique, held his hand. His wife, Rachel, sat quietly beside him. His brother and sister stood nearby. Together, they made the hardest decision imaginable: to remove life support. Several hours later, Ace Frehley passed away peacefully at the age of 74. The time of death was recorded in the early afternoon in Morristown, New Jersey. His family later confirmed the news with a short, heartfelt statement. Ace passed away surrounded by those who loved him most. He was a father, a husband, a brother, and above all, a dreamer. His music and spirit will live on in every person who ever picked up a guitar because of him. The announcement spread like wildfire. Within minutes, tributes began pouring in from around the world. Fans left candles and guitar picks outside the Kiss Museum in Las Vegas. Guitarists from Metallica, Foo Fighters, and Guns N' Roses shared posts calling him one of the true originals. For those who grew up watching him bend notes into galaxies, the loss felt deeply personal. Over the following days, rock stations around the world devoted hours to Ace's music. New York Groove, Shock Me, Cold Gin, and Rocket Ride dominated playlists again, just as they had in the 70s. Younger listeners discovered his work for the first time, while older fans found themselves listening with tears in their eyes. Ace's riffs had always sounded larger than life, but now they carried something heavier. They sounded final. News outlets described his passing as the end of an era, but for those who knew his story, it was more than that. It was the end of a lifelong balancing act, a man who had lived fast, fallen hard, but somehow kept finding his way back. In interviews years earlier, Ace often joked about how many times he should have died already. "I've cheated death more than I can count," he'd said in one Rolling Stone interview, laughing. "But I guess when it's time, it's time. Until then, I'll keep playing." In the end, that was exactly who Ace Frehley was, a man who lived and breathed rock and roll until the very last moment. He wasn't perfect. He was unpredictable, reckless, stubborn, but also sincere. And for Paul Stanley, watching the world mourn his old friend, it must have felt like history circling back, like the final silence after the last note fades. In Morristown, fans gathered outside the hospital where Ace had taken his final breath. They brought flowers, guitars, even silver lightning bolts cut from cardboard. Someone played a small speaker on loop, softly echoing the opening riff of Shock Me. Others just stood in quiet reflection. No pyrotechnics, no spotlight, just gratitude for the man who made music feel like outer space. Ace Frehley's story ended where it began, with family, with sound, and with the stubborn spark of a dreamer who refused to be ordinary. He had once said that he never wanted to grow up, never wanted to stop feeling that charge when the lights went down and the first chord hit. And in the eyes of those who loved him, he never did. To understand why fans loved Ace Frehley, you have to look beyond the makeup, beyond the riffs, beyond the chaos. Ace Frehley's shadow, genius, rebel, enigma. Ace wasn't just the spaceman of Kiss, he was the pulse of its danger, the heartbeat of its rebellion. His guitar didn't just play notes, it spoke. It slurred, screamed, and soared, as if each solo were fighting gravity itself. In an era when image ruled, Ace's raw imperfection made him real. From the moment he walked into that 1973 audition wearing mismatched sneakers, there was something disarmingly authentic about him. He didn't try to impress, he just played. That unfiltered energy became part of Kiss's DNA, the crackle beneath the polish, the streak of lightning that kept their sound alive. Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons built the empire, but Ace gave it its voltage. Songs like Shock Me, Cold Gin, and Parasite weren't just fan favorites, they were blueprints for hard rock itself. When he went solo in 1978, few expected much, but Ace Frehley turned out to be the best of the 4 individual Kiss albums. His hit, New York Groove, captured everything that made him special. Swagger, humor, and a sense of motion that never stopped. The world saw, maybe for the first time, what Ace could do when he was free. But freedom, for Ace, was always a double-edged sword. Success brought temptation, and temptation brought the slow spiral that haunted the rest of his career. He stumbled often, through addiction, broken tours, and near misses. Yet fans never left him. They saw themselves in him, the dreamer who couldn't quite stay steady, but never stopped reaching for the stars. Ace embodied rock's most painful truth, that the same fire that fuels creation can also consume it. Even in his roughest years, there was something magnetic about him, that spark that said, "I'm still here." Behind his grin and jokes was a man who wanted to be seen, not just watched. He hid his vulnerability behind laughter, guitars, and noise, but every solo betrayed it, that yearning to matter, to last. His unpredictability was both his armor and his curse. When he played, he was untouchable. When the lights went down, he was human again, flawed, searching, and beautifully so. When Paul called him an irreplaceable rock soldier after his death, it wasn't just tribute, it was reconciliation. In death, Ace Frehley became more than the rebel who fell. He became the brother who made their dream possible, and the echo that will forever hum beneath Kiss's thunder. He was the chaos that gave their order meaning, the wild star that burned too fast, but lit the sky just long enough for everyone to look up. Yes, before the arenas, before the fireworks, before the makeup became myth, there were just two young men with guitars, trying to make something of themselves. The rise of Paul and Ace. In the early 70s, New York was not the city of dreams it pretended to be. The clubs were rough, the nights long, and every musician was chasing the same impossible thing, a sound that would get them out. Paul Stanley, born Stanley Eisen, grew up in Queens feeling like an outsider. He'd been born with a deformed ear, partially deaf on one side, and as a kid, he learned early how cruel people could be. But that same pain made him sharp. It gave him drive, hunger, and a sense that music might be his escape. He didn't just want to be heard, he wanted to be seen. Every time he looked in the mirror, he imagined a version of himself that the world couldn't laugh at. That's who Paul Stanley became, the performer, the showman, the star child. Ace Frehley, on the other hand, was chaos wrapped in charm. A Bronx kid with a mischievous grin, he was as unpolished as he was talented. Ace didn't think about fame or business, he just wanted to play. He was the kind of guy who'd plug in his guitar, crank the amp until it screamed, and grin like a kid who'd just gotten away with something. His humor, his unpredictability, his swagger, it all felt effortless. While Paul worked through discipline, Ace lived through instinct. When Ace auditioned for Paul and Gene Simmons in 1973, legend says he walked into the room wearing one orange sneaker and one red. He plugged in, ripped through a solo, and didn't say much. The other guys exchanged looks. They knew. Ace wasn't just another guitarist. He had something raw, magnetic, almost dangerous. That was the moment Kiss began to take shape, not just as a band, but as a chemistry experiment that would redefine rock. The early years were brutal. They could barely afford rent, lugging their gear across freezing streets to play half-empty clubs. But what they lacked in comfort, they made up for in conviction. Paul was the visionary, mapping out stage concepts, harmonies, and wardrobe ideas. Ace brought the spark, the spontaneity that made their sound unpredictable and alive. Together, they struck a balance. Paul built the framework, and Ace set it on fire. Their bond, at first, was simple: music and mischief. They were brothers in ambition, hungry to make their mark. Paul once said that in those early years, he and Ace would finish a show, grab a drink, and laugh about the chaos of it all. There was no ego then, no talk of money or ownership, just the shared thrill of being young and loud in a world that didn't expect them to survive. As Kiss evolved, so did their dynamic. Paul was always the perfectionist. He cared about every note, every costume detail, every lyric. Ace was the opposite. He thrived on imperfection. He'd hit the wrong note and make it sound right. Fans loved him for that unpredictability, that flash of danger that made Kiss shows electric. Paul admired it too, even if he wouldn't always admit it. Deep down, he knew Ace brought something to the stage no one could manufacture: soul. By 1975, Kiss had exploded. Alive turned them from struggling dreamers into global icons. Kids wore their makeup, mimicked their struts, and dreamed of guitars that shot smoke and fire. But with fame came fractures. Paul, always cautious, began to sense that Ace was drifting. The late nights became longer, the partying harder. While Paul saw the band as a disciplined craft, Ace saw it as a lifestyle. The tension that would one day tear them apart began quietly, like cracks under fresh paint. Still, on stage, they were unstoppable. Watch footage of Detroit Rock City from those years, and you can see it. The unspoken dialogue between Paul and Ace. Paul commands the crowd, feeding them every ounce of showmanship, while Ace steps into the spotlight, guitar screaming, turning chaos into art. They were yin and yang, control and chaos, order and fire. Without Ace, Paul's precision might have felt cold. Without Paul, Ace's brilliance might have burned too fast. Together, they made magic. Off stage, though, it wasn't always laughter. Paul was business-minded. Ace wasn't. Decisions about royalties, songwriting credits, and creative direction began to spark resentment. Ace felt boxed in, his ideas dismissed. Paul felt frustrated that Ace didn't take the band as seriously as he did. It was like trying to steer a car when the other guy kept pulling the wheel toward the cliff, Paul once said in an interview. But when Ace was on, when he was really there, it was pure electricity. Despite the tension, there were moments of brotherhood that fans never saw. Late nights after shows, sitting backstage in silence, just sharing the quiet relief of surviving another night. Times when Paul would cover for Ace during his rougher days, or when Ace would crack a joke to cut the tension in a meeting. They fought, yes, but they also understood each other in ways no one else could. Both of them had something to prove. Both of them had spent their lives fighting to be seen. In those years, the makeup became both mask and mirror. The star child and the spaceman, two personas built to survive the chaos of fame. Paul's face paint, with its single black star, was his way of owning the part of himself the world once mocked. Ace's silver lightning design was pure escape, a reflection of the dreamer he was. When they took the stage, they weren't just playing music. They were transforming pain into spectacle. That shared understanding, that shared escape, was what made their connection so profound. As the 70s rolled on, their differences grew sharper, but so did their respect. Paul knew Ace had a natural genius. His riffs were melodic but heavy, his solos structured yet wild. Ace, in turn, knew that Paul was the backbone, the one who made sure the music actually got recorded, the shows got booked, the machine kept running. Even when they clashed, there was an underlying admiration neither of them could quite put into words. It's easy now to remember the fights, the falling outs, the interviews filled with bitterness. But in those early years, before the world knew their names, there was something sacred about what they built together. Two kids from different boroughs, different worlds, united by sound and dream. They made each other better, even when they made each other miserable. Looking back, Paul once said, "We were all trying to find ourselves under that makeup." The irony is, maybe that's Sadrina when we were most ourselves. That was the strange beauty of their partnership. It was both volatile and vital. Ace brought the wildness that gave Kiss its heartbeat. Paul brought the focus that kept that heart beating. Together, they created something neither could have done alone. When you peel away the glitter and spectacle, their story was never really about fame. It was about two men searching for identity, validation, and belonging in a world that didn't hand those things out easily. And for a few shining years, before the chaos took over, they found all of that in each other's music. Truly, even the strongest bonds can fray, and behind the roaring stages and blinding lights, tensions quietly tore at the heart of Kiss. The rift, when the music stopped. By the late 70s, Kiss was more than a band. It was an empire. The makeup, the fire, the explosions, everything about them screamed spectacle. But behind the glitter and thunder, something darker was brewing. Fame had amplified everything. The applause, the exhaustion, and the cracks that had begun to split through the core of the group. For Paul Stanley, every show was a mission. He was the perfectionist, the one who made sure the chords were tight, the harmonies exact, the audience satisfied. For Ace Frehley, it was about freedom. The stage was where he could lose himself, where the rules didn't apply. Those two energies had always balanced each other, Paul's discipline and Ace's chaos. But by 1978, that balance had started to collapse. The band was churning out albums, tours, and media appearances at an inhuman pace. The fame they'd fought so hard for now felt like a prison of expectation. Each member was drifting into their own world, and for Ace, that world became a blur of late nights and excess. The substances that once loosened him up before a show began to take control. Friends later recalled how he'd sometimes show up hours late or not at all. Others remembered his humor turning sharp, his laughter quieter. Paul, who had built his career on control, found it infuriating. In interviews, he'd speak with a kind of restrained disappointment. "I loved Ace," he once admitted, "but you can't build a rocket ship when one of the engines doesn't want to fire." The tension grew backstage, where Paul and Gene Simmons pushed for tighter shows, cleaner performances, and more elaborate productions, while Ace pushed back, insisting that KISS had lost its soul. "I didn't want to be a puppet," Ace would later say in his autobiography, No Regrets. "I wanted to play rock and roll, loud, messy, real, but it felt like everything was about money, control, image. It wasn't fun anymore." Their arguments weren't explosive. They were colder, quieter, more dangerous. Resentment simmered under the surface. During recording sessions for Dynasty, 1979, the band rarely played together in the same room. Ace's guitar parts were often recorded separately. Paul and Gene would rewrite songs behind his back. When Ace brought in his own material, it was sometimes dismissed or diluted. "It felt like they didn't trust me anymore," he later reflected, "like I was just there to wear the makeup." Paul, on the other hand, saw a man who was drifting away by choice. "We were killing ourselves to keep the ship from sinking," Paul said years later. "Ace was one of the most talented people I'd ever met, but talent doesn't mean much if you're not there to use it." The final years before Ace's departure were marked by silence, more than shouting. Band meetings turned into monologues. Sessions ended early. Tour buses felt like cold, moving tombs. The same men who once dreamed together in small New York clubs could barely look each other in the eye. In a now famous interview from 1982, Paul was asked about Ace's absence from several shows. His response was painfully telling. "Sometimes you reach a point where words don't fix things anymore. You just keep playing and hope the music can say what you can." But even the music couldn't bridge the gap anymore. When Ace officially left Kiss in 1982, it wasn't with a bang, it was with exhaustion. He told reporters he needed a break, but those close to him knew it wasn't a pause. It was goodbye. Still, beneath the resentment, there was grief. Paul later admitted that Ace's departure left a hole no one could fill. "He was unpredictable," Paul said, "but when he was good, he was brilliant. There was something in his playing that I could never replace." In the years that followed, Kiss carried on. New members, new tours, new masks, but something essential was gone. The chemistry, that strange magic that came from their clashing personalities, had vanished. And while they'd reunite decades later, the scars never fully healed. Looking back, it's hard not to wonder what could have been if the four original members, Paul, Gene, Ace, and Peter, had found peace earlier. If fame hadn't magnified their flaws, if the pressure hadn't buried their friendship under expectation. Paul once said in a 2014 interview, "The tragedy isn't that we fought. The tragedy is that we stopped talking. We forgot we were just four guys trying to make people feel something." It's a haunting thought, the idea that the silence between them grew louder than the music they made. For all the fire, the spectacle, and the noise, what lingered most wasn't the explosions on stage, but the echoes of what was lost when the music stopped. The Kiss through time. The legacy of Kiss is one of spectacle, reinvention, and endurance. A band that turned rock and roll into mythology. What began as four young dreamers in New York in 1973 became a cultural juggernaut that redefined what it meant to perform. They weren't just musicians, they were larger-than-life characters. The Star Child, the Demon, the Spaceman, and the Catman, each one embodying a piece of the rock fantasy that millions of fans came to worship. Musically, they helped bridge the raw aggression of early hard rock with the theatricality that would inspire entire generations of performers. From Metallica, their songs, Rock and Roll All Night, Detroit Rock City, I Was Made for Lovin' You, became anthems that refused to age. Beyond the music, Kiss built a brand unlike anything before. From comic books and action figures to farewell tours that never seemed to end. But beneath the fire and makeup was something deeper, a story about ambition, brotherhood, ego, and survival. Decades after their debut, Kiss remains a symbol of both the glory and the price of chasing immortality. Their legend isn't just about fame or money, it's about the unrelenting power of rock to make people believe in something bigger than themselves. Outro. May Ace's soul rest in peace. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to stay updated on more stories that dive deep into rock history.